Let's go.
Welcome to Leading Remotely, helping remote-first leaders navigate, survive, and thrive in this new world of work. Let's make remote work.
Hi, and welcome to Leading Remotely. I'm your host, Matt Heyman, and I'm excited to share a really great episode with you today. I'm discussing conscious leadership and conscious culture with my guest, Sarah Hawley. Sarah is the CEO and founder of Moatly.com, a platform that helps build happy, high-performing teams. She's also a speaker and author of the book Conscious Leadership, A Journey from Ego to Heart. In this episode, we cover the state of remote recruitment in the current economic climate, Sarah's experiences building multiple fully remote businesses, the lessons learned from asking her team how happy they were at work for the first time, perks versus culture in a remote workplace, a fantastic primer on conscious leadership and the huge benefits it can bring individually and collectively, the role of vulnerability in conscious leadership, and more besides. My thanks to Sarah for talking with me and modelling her own commitment to vulnerability and transparency on the show. Without delay, let's get straight to the interview. Sarah Hawley, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. Thank you for having me. I'm excited. I just love to talk about all of this stuff. So I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Great to have you on the show. Obviously, the book is fantastic. I've read the book, really, really impressed by it, really enjoyed it. Lots to talk about besides. Why don't we start with Grow Moatly, though? Can you tell us a little bit more about the platform and what led you to build that company?
Yeah, for sure. So I turned my company's remote back in 2014, and really the journey of turning my company's remote and leading from a distance was something that transformed me as a leader. I became a much better leader, and my book, Conscious Leadership, that you were referring to, kind of goes through that whole journey and it probably explains in more detail than we'd be able to get into in the podcast of what that transformational journey was like. But when I sold my last company in 2018, I was sitting with myself and thinking, what am I most passionate about? What do I most want to work on next? And hands down, it was remote work. I couldn't see a world where that wasn't our future. And this is obviously pre-pandemic. So I had no idea that something like that was going to come along and kind of really push us into it collectively overnight. But I think that is one of the gifts that's really come out of that. So Grow Moatly is the company that I started. I started working on it in 2019 and started working a lot faster once the pandemic started. But we are a remote work marketplace. So we help any company anywhere in the world find, hire, and retain aligned talent anywhere in the world. So similar to kind of a gig or freelancer marketplace. However, we have a culture-first approach. We have an end-to-end HR tech for the leadership side of the business of the marketplace, the business side of the marketplace. And it's all about building your entire team and long-term positions. So that's the big difference. It's not a freelancer marketplace. It's really helping companies hire and build their entire team and helping professionals find those conscious culture-first companies to work with.
So I've asked this of a couple of people on the podcast. I'm interested to get your take with what looks like the economy tightening a little bit. I'm curious, are you seeing any waning of the appetite amongst employees for remote first roles, or would you say it's actually the opposite and people are more inclined to go for remote first roles now?
I'm definitely not seeing any waning. I mean, obviously I'm firmly in the remote work space. So, maybe if I worked in a bigger corporate and, we had hybrid and remote roles and whatever, I don't know. I don't know what that experience is, but no, not at all. I mean, I think, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and whether as people become more nervous about can they actually get employment and that kind of thing, whether it will shift. But at the same time, remote work is a global conversation. It's a global opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunity right now for companies as well to be more creative about where they're hiring from and bringing in this diverse group of talent that can also help their wage budget go further. So, I don't think so. And I really hope that we don't get into a world where people use the economic downturn to force people back to offices. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Ultimately, companies can also be saving the expense of an office. So really that would be an area where I'd be looking as a leader if my company was under strain due to economic situations. Like, okay, well, if we're going to cut costs, why not cut the office cost rather than the people cost?
One of the other things I think that comes up a lot time and time again is because remote first is a relatively new experience for a lot of people. Are you and your team speaking to companies about how they put themselves forward as remote first, how they actually make it clear about what remote first means for their organization? What sort of things are you saying to them and what sort of things are coming back?
Yeah, for sure. We're actually soon to launch our Culture First certification program. And what we're doing is allowing companies to turn their profiles public. At the moment, a company sets a profile on Moatly and it's not publicly searchable, but we're changing that because one of the big things we want to do is really showcase all of these businesses that are remote first and are culture first as well. So yeah, we're definitely helping right now through our content, and we have monthly webinars and things like that, but we really want to bring that into our technology as a way to showcase these small to medium businesses all over the world who are really progressive and forward thinking. They understand the value of culture and they are wanting to communicate with the world that they are remote first, and people are looking for those companies for sure.
Yeah, totally agree. So let's think about then conscious leadership and conscious culture, the main focus of the episode today. I want to circle back to the book for just a moment. One point that really stood out to me is where you tell the story of the first time you asked your team how happy they were at work. I think there's a lot of leadership lessons inside of that experience, and I'd love you to just sort of unpack that story a little bit and give a bit more background to that story.
Yeah, so I did a 3-year program that is a joint program between Entrepreneurs Organisation and MIT. And after the first year, I came back to my office in Australia at the time. And actually, no, that's not even correct because it was 2016. So I didn't come back to my office. I just came back to work from having this week off or week of learning. And one of the things that we had learned about at the Entrepreneurial Masters program was around the importance of culture and the importance of understanding the real perspective of your team on your culture. And it was when I was sitting in that session, it was very like my body was activated and I was like, dang, like I'm telling myself that we have this amazing culture, but I don't know for sure how people feel about it. And in truth, I have a sense that they don't think it's as good as what I think it is. And so I came back and I just put out a survey, simple, how happy are you out of 10 and why? And I believe we did a more detailed survey soon after, but that was kind of the first question that I asked. And I think the results came back like 6 or 7 out of 10. I can't remember the exact number now, but it was, it wasn't terrible, it wasn't great either. And I remember when I asked everyone just how sick I felt, kind of knowing that the answer wasn't going to be as high as I would like and just scared about what I was going to find out, because I was really finally actually looking internally at our culture and asking our team versus just thinking in my mind and projecting my ideas out about how amazing we are and telling people, come and work here, it's so amazing. But like really asking people and really hearing from them the things that they liked, the things that they didn't like. Yeah, so it was scary to put it out there. The feeling from when I sent it to like as the answers started coming back in was very like sick in my stomach, and then seeing that final score. But once it was done and I was looking at the score and looking at the results, I actually felt so empowered because I was like, wow, I actually know now. I know what people think and feel. I know the things that we can do to improve. And it wasn't necessarily easy because some of the things that came up were maybe things that I thought we were doing well that we weren't. And I had to really confront that and sit with it. But every single month from that point on, I asked my team, and I still do to this day, we built it into the technology at Moatly. So everyone, who works on Moatly, they answer, how happy are you every single month? How happy are you out of 10 at work and why? And I use that now as like my leading KPI, my leading metric, because I think that, I know that if my team are happy and engaged, everything else in the company is going to work a lot smoother. If they're not happy and engaged, then eventually things are going to start to break down internally because they're not going to necessarily treat the customers as well or treat each other as well. not because I mean they're nasty, but just because if they're unhappy, like things are going to start to give and we're going to start to experience some muck in the culture. So it's confronting, but it was literally the best thing I ever did. Completely transformed my leadership. This was one of the big things because now I was actually looking at it and actually able to focus inward and see where were our areas for improvement, where were my areas for improvement.
One of the reasons I love that story so much, and you elaborate on this in the book, is the fact that you had a lot of what we might call window dressing. You talk about the perks, the trinkets almost of what you might think of as really high value perks, but you realized over time that really wasn't what was making the difference. Would that be a fair summary?
Totally. And I think it's very similar with companies. We get obsessed with our product or our service and what we're bringing. But if we don't ask our customers, like, do you actually value these things that we do? Like, what do you value and what don't you value? If we're not having that conversation with them, we're just enamored with our own reflection in the mirror and we don't really know for sure how the rest of the world sees and experiences us. It's exactly the same with the culture. So I can create all of these perks and benefits and things that I think are really cool and really fun. And if I don't ask my team if they actually like this stuff, if they actually value it, and what do they value? Because turns out, some of the things they value are things that I just do naturally without even thinking about it. I don't even place value on it. And so that's an opportunity for me to see, oh, wow, that's actually a real strength. That's really valuable. I should own that. I should talk about it. And this other thing over here that I thought was really cool is like, nobody cares about that. And I'm putting all this energy into it and I'm thinking that it's really amazing. And they're just like, don't really care. It doesn't really resonate with me. And I think I just want to throw out there that I think the office physical space can create a lot of that as well. If we think we have this really cool space with a really cool ping pong table and we do free food on Wednesday, like that can be something that culture really hides behind. Is that the right word? Like we think that that's culture, but it's really not.
It obscures.
Yeah, it's like what people really value is being trusted, being empowered. They value their freedom. They value, the autonomy and all of that. And if we think that they value the ping pong table because we like it and we think it looks cool, like that's, something that is often overlooked, I think.
Yeah, and for me, the overlap there with the remote workplace is really key. I think as some organizations strive to hire top talent in remote roles, they throw perks, they throw out advantages, perks that somebody might have. But actually, when you look at what matters to people, similar to what you've said, it's about the team, it's about the trust, it's about the autonomy to undertake the work in the way that you choose to do it. So I think it's a really useful, the reason I wanted to bring it up, I think it's a really useful reminder for people that there's a lot more to it than just perks, especially when it comes to the remote workplace.
Totally. I mean, if I look at all of the feedback and the anecdotal evidence that I have of my current team and what they value, one of the highest value items is the transparency in our culture. That's one of the things that people value the most. Everything, I mean, we're a startup, so there's a lot of up and downs. It's a roller coaster, and we're very transparent about that as a leadership team with the organization. And I can see through the feedback from the monthly question and also just through comments and different things that is very, very highly valued. And that's not necessarily something that you would think of when you're putting together your perks and benefits. But like actually, people really want to work in a place where they know they're not being BS'd all the time.
From your perspective then, what does conscious leadership actually entail? What's your definition? How are you defining that term?
Yeah, I think the first point is doing your own work as an individual and bringing that into the workplace then. So it's really looking inward and knowing that you play a part as a leader, I play a part as a leader in everything that's happening in the organization. So if we're having challenges and problems, the first thing that I do is look at, well, how have I contributed? Where is this in my energy field? Where am I participating in this or not participating or whatever it might be that's allowing it to kind of grow and expand and be a part of what's happening? So I think that's a big part of it is looking inward first, not overtaking responsibility, like knowing that we're not the whole entirety of a challenge or a problem necessarily, but we're certainly a part of it. And then I think it's around bringing your whole self to work. So as I was saying, like doing that work and then bringing it in, but we all are whole people. The idea that we're a professional self and a personal self is really quite flawed. Obviously, there are attributes and aspects of us that come alive in our professional world, and there are attributes and aspects that come alive in our friendships, in our loverships. Like we have different elements in different parts of our life, but it's not like we actually cut off the other things when we are in one scenario. And so pretending that, something incredibly challenging in our personal lives isn't going to impact our work life is false, and vice versa. Pretending, it's almost, I think it's accepted in the world that, oh, if work's stressful, it's like, yeah, it bleeds into your personal life. That's all really normal. But then we like shame people if their stressful personal life comes into their professional life. And that's not realistic. So I think learning how to bring our whole selves in a way that is authentic, transparent, and it requires, a lot of vulnerability, because it's not easy to show up to a leadership meeting, for example, in a situation I had recently, and my husband and I were just going through a really tough time. And just showing up and being like, I just need to let you guys know I'm in it right now. Like I'm having a rough time. Me and my partner are struggling. We're going to start doing some therapy and working through things. But like right in this moment, I'm, really having a hard time. And it's distracting from everything, because this is my foundation of my life. And of course, I don't think anyone in the world hasn't had a tough time with their partner. Like it's not like people are like, oh my God, or anything. They're just like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. I know what it's like when that happens. It's really hard to focus. And the thing that I've learned is actually when we just express what's real, the charge usually dissipates. And we actually can focus a lot better on our work and on the situation at hand, because we're not trying to put all our energy into hiding it and pretending, I'll just pretend I'm really good because, these are my team and I really need to show up for them, and I'll just pretend I'm in a really good energy. Like that requires a lot more energy than just opening the meeting and saying, hey, just want you all to know I'm going through a tough time. My energy's a little low today. That's why. Love you all. Appreciate you. Let's get into, what we're doing. But bringing all of that, the highs and the lows and the challenges, I think is a really big part of conscious leadership, because it creates a safe space for other people to do the same. And the reality is those in our team are going to go through things in their personal lives as well. And how many times have we seen in organizations where all of a sudden somebody is not performing at the level that they usually do, and we don't know why? We're scratching our heads and we're thinking, what's going on? Like, do they not like it here? Are they interviewing elsewhere? We just don't know. We're filling in the gaps, and then maybe they get a performance review where we give them all this feedback of areas they need to improve. And so then they're probably even more stressed out. And lo and behold, turns out, someone in their family is really terminally ill, or they're going through a divorce, that they just didn't feel safe to bring that into the workplace. So now they're also holding the shame of looking like they're not performing and they're not good enough. And we're also, as leaders, battling this, like, are they not happy here? Are they leaving? Like, what's going on? If we could just bring that stuff in, then it just makes for a much smoother environment for everyone. But it's up to us as leaders to create the safety for that. And what that means is radical authenticity and vulnerability. And that's very scary and very challenging. And, as the leader, what I've found in my experience since going on this journey for the last, definitely since 2018, I had a breakdown, and I shared that with my team. And that was like definitely that was a level of depth that I really kind of haven't gone back from, I suppose. But what I've found is that I'm definitely the most vulnerable, the most authentic, the most open and willing to share, but I have to be to create the safety for everybody else.
Wow. And yeah, really appreciate your candor and transparency. Really powerful. One of the things I think that perhaps puts people off a little bit is, how do you protect yourself in that situation as a leader? If you're getting all of that input from your team about what's going on in their lives, how do you, or where do you draw the line in terms of being there to support, but in an appropriate way, and managing the relationship as a leader versus a therapist? How do you navigate that?
That is a really good question. I think that's, really important, and also comes back to leading from example. So when we are sharing with our team, when we're bringing our vulnerable, authentic selves, we're not coming to them to hold space for us necessarily, or, solve our problem for us or guide us. We are just letting them know that this is what's going on. And I think it's a hard line to draw, because say in my situation, Theodora Gatin, one of my co-founders, I mean, we're very good friends. This is our third company together. We've spent time together in person. She lives in Romania, but we actually do support each other through personal stuff as well. But we're not going to be like in our leadership meeting and I'm going to be like, I'm going through this. And then she's like, oh my God, like, how can I, like, that's not really how it happens. It's just more sharing where we're at. And people may give a reflection of like, I'm here to support you. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for sharing. But it's not like we're diving into somebody's problems. And I think that's part of learning is, as a leader, yes, we show up and we share authentically, but we're not asking for these people in our team to support us, help us, solve it for us. And on the other side, that is a boundary issue. And that's something that we need to learn as leaders. This is part of doing the inner work, is having the boundaries. So offering to support one of our team members, like, are you supported? How can I support you? Is really important. But that support could look like, do you have access to a coach or a therapist or whatever you might need in this situation? Like, not offering ourselves as that necessarily. Boundaries is, really some of the hardest work, or at least it has been for me. I know some people are better at it than others. And a lot of it, I think, comes down to our upbringing and how our parents taught us boundaries. And they all tried their best. And, I try my best as a parent as well. But, often we find people have boundaries that are like walls. And in that case, they're not going to be showing up vulnerably, authentically, and they're going to have zero space or time for someone else. And as a leader, that's going to create a very unsafe environment for people to be able to show up and share. On the opposite side, if we don't have any boundaries and we're vomiting all of our stuff all over everyone, we're leaning on our team for emotional support, and then we're welcoming them in when they need emotional support, like, we need to find a balance in the middle. And I think that's really important for leaders to do. I just want to share one other thing about conscious leadership that I feel is like the most important thing, is just to hold ourselves in really high integrity about how we speak with each other and about each other. So for me, it's like, I would never say anything to anyone about someone else that I haven't already said to that person, or that I'm going to say to that person. So maybe I reach out to someone for some, I might want to spitball like how I'm going to have a conversation, but that will be the one and only time that I talk about that situation before I go address it with the person. And that person that I've chosen would be a very trusted source. But I see this, and I want to share it because I think it's pervasive in company culture, is people just talking about each other, just bitching and backstabbing, and all under the guise of like, we're trying to make the company better, and like, this is really problematic and how are we going to solve it? But really, like, quite frankly, it's just bitchy, because the only way to solve these things is to just have direct conversations, address things the first time they happen, get them moving. And if the person is not the right person, navigating them out. But that's one of the biggest, hardest things to start shifting as a leader, if that is in the culture, is just like, from draw a line in the sand and be like, I will not speak about anyone with anyone else. And leadership teams are really guilty of this, where we're in the leadership team, so we talk about all the people and the challenges, but that is not safe, because as soon as somebody steps their foot in the wrong direction, you're going to be speaking about them as well, or they're going to be speaking about you as well. And it just does not create any safety, and it can really eat away at the culture. So that just popped into my mind as something that I think is really important to bring people's attention to, because I just see it like often.
Do you lead a remote team but struggle with spontaneous communication and collaboration? If so, I'd like to invite you to check out our platform, wonder.me, a virtual workspace where teams connect, collaborate, and grow, working side by side from anywhere. For a limited time only, podcast listeners can use the discount code LRP30 to get 30% off your first 3-month subscription or annual plan. Head on over to wonder.me, start your free trial today, and use discount code LRP30. Now, back to the interview. So let's build on that for a bit then. This idea of conscious culture. What are some of the markers for you that indicate that there is a very strong conscious culture within an organization?
When people are mindful of the language they're using when they're speaking, they speak with a pace that allows them to process a little bit as they're speaking, find the right words, the right language. Maybe they're correcting themselves as they go. Because I think that just shows this consideration and awareness for others and for inclusivity and for own reflection and growth. Definitely not like speaking directly to people versus behind their backs. Like the moment a leader starts complaining to me about someone in their team or whatever, I'm just like, yeah, your culture sucks. Like I just know it because that's the reality. And it, like I said, it is pervasive. But it's really more that when I see a culture thriving, it's like we have a problem, we've recently identified it, and we are addressing it right away. This is not a problem that I've been talking about for 3 years on repeat. And that's, I think that's a sign of an unhealthy culture, is when you're looping around the same issues, the same challenges. And it's not to say we don't loop for a little bit, even when we're conscious. Like I find myself in patterns and then I'm like, okay, this is a pattern. So it might take me a few iterations to see it. So I'm not saying, it's not about being perfect and never having challenges. I mean, that's not realistic. I think when you're leading from a place of consciousness, it's almost like, all right, I'm just sitting in the constant challenge. Like that life is always going to throw something at me next to work through. But it's really about like once we have something in our awareness, we're going to do something about it. We're going to try and improve it. We're going to try and shift it, unblock the energy, whatever it might be. So I think things like being able to see that people have consideration and respect for each other, that they're careful with their language, to be self-aware and considerate of other people, and we're not just circling around problems over and over and over again.
So I'm also interested in remote culture specifically, and conscious remote culture, if you like. Are there any specific challenges there around what we've talked about that you think are more pervasive inside of a remote first culture?
It's interesting because I don't really think it's actually different. I think that the culture is the culture. I think that operating fully remotely allows us to see and experience the culture more, because we are not distracted by the physical. So when we're physically going into a space and sharing that space for 8-10 hours a day with a handful of other people, or hundreds or thousands of other people, there's a lot on our emotional, energetic systems that's being filtered. We're dealing with all these different people's personal habits, levels of tidiness, cleanliness, how much they want to talk or not talk. There's just like a lot that our systems are literally kind of regulating all day long. When we remove all of that and every person gets to be in the environment that they thrive in most, it's a lot easier to see like what really is our culture. Like how do we really show up for each other? How do we talk with each other? What do we value here? So I don't really think it's different. I don't think the things that I do now don't need to be done in an office or what have you. I think ideally they would be done in any environment. Leading with consciousness and heart would be done in any environment. I think certainly for me, it was easier to see it and focus on this aspect when I didn't have the distraction of the office. But I don't think it's any more or less important.
Okay, so last question then from me. You've got a remote first leader sat in front of you. They're fairly new to conscious culture, conscious leadership. What are some of the small steps they can start to take to improve that culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing is surveying your team. So asking them how happy they are, and then using the results, like looking at it and sharing them transparently with them. So you might not share the actual written feedback, especially in a small team. You can often actually attribute who said what, or you think you can. And so you just don't want to add that in. But you can definitely share the score, and you can share the themes of the things that we heard in your own language and feed it back to them. So I think this asking for feedback, but then immediately showing the team we're doing something with this. We care about it and we're doing something. And practically what that looks like as well is noticing, the things inside of you where you feel defensive, you feel upset, you feel unseen, unworthy, untriggered, like you've failed. Like all of these different things might come up because we obviously don't For most people, getting the negative feedback isn't as easy, and getting praise feels a lot better. So there can be things that we need to work through to understand, like, oh, wow, I haven't been doing as good a job in this area as I thought. What does that bring up in me? So I do think as well, another practical step is doing this inner work of self. So do you have a coach or a therapist or someone or a community, a group, whatever it might be, where even just reading books and doing the exercises, whatever it might be, but what is your rhythm and your pace for actually looking inward and doing that work? And then the next step, I would say, is just slowly, little by little, starting to share more of yourself in that way with your team. And what that could just look like is, so last week I shared with you all that our culture score was 7 out of 10. And, one of the big things that we want to work on is being more transparent with our communication or what have you. I just want to let you all know that, that brought up some stuff for me. I was feeling a little bit like a failure, which is a story that comes from my teenage years where I was trying to, do a good thing at sport or something, and I didn't succeed. And whatever it might be, whatever you've kind of connected dots on, and just say, I just want to just share transparently that that's what I've been moving through. So I'm really grateful for the experience to do this work on myself, because I'm, learning and growing through that. And I really care about what you guys shared, and I'm going to keep showing up. So it doesn't have, that's what I mean about, that's just an example of going back to what we were talking about earlier about the boundaries as well. It's not this big sob story of like, oh my God, you guys said these things and then I feel like a failure and I've been sad all week. It's just like acknowledging, like, this came up for me and I'm showing up and doing my work to learn through it and grow through it. And I really want to express to people that when we feel triggered and heightened, it's really hard. Like, that is intense in our bodies. And so not to shame ourselves either, but that's the gold. Like, that's what you're looking for. Like, when you feel really heightened, where it's hard to wrangle and control the feelings in your body, where you feel angry, frustrated, sad, that kind of spirally, like it's hard to wrap your hands around it. And you're like, thank God that person's not in front of me because I'd probably punch them or whatever it might be. Like, that's the compass. That's like, wow, there's some gold here that we need to look at. And it's really tricky because what we actually feel in that situation is righteous in our feelings. Like, we have been wronged. The person is wrong what they did. But if we dig a little deeper, this is just a story that is playing out, that's iterating a past story. That's a version of something that's happened to us in the past that we're still hanging on to. And some other person could experience the exact same situation and not feel anything, because if they don't have that story and that framework, it's not going to trigger them. So just starting to really feel when those emotions get heightened, and knowing that that's your inner work. And I've gone off track a little bit, but I will come back to another practical step on that. So that is something as leaders where when we get heightened and we're feeling frustrated or things aren't moving or whatever it might be, like knowing your own patterns that you tend to like act in a way that maybe you don't act in 90% of the time when you're calm. And I'm not saying it's necessarily anger, but whatever it is that kind of seems to come out of you at times, that's a great first practical thing that you can do as well, is instead of acting it, notice it and speak it. So I say in my leadership team meeting, if I feel really heightened, like, okay, wow, that conversation that just came up is really bringing something up in me. I'm feeling a lot of feelings. So I would like to park that for right now so that I can go away and, process the feelings that I'm having that feel really intense. And then can we circle back on Tuesday at 10 a.m. to continue working through that situation or whatever. That takes a lot. It takes a lot of time actually to bring awareness to when we're feeling heightened and all of that. But I think that's a incredible skill for leaders to do, is notice when they are in a heightened state, de-escalate themselves and the situation. And sometimes, I've had a situation where I actually had to end the meeting because I was like, I can't even like focus my attention on something else. Like, I am so activated by this situation that I'm not even functioning anymore. So this meeting is pointless right now. It's not pointless in its reason for being, but it's pointless for right now. So I need to go away and process this, and can we come back tomorrow? And that skill takes time, but will really serve you well for de-escalating things and not ending up doing and saying things that are even harder to unwind later.
That's a really, really good summary of where people can make some really good inroads and also not put too much pressure on themselves to try and be perfect too soon, to give themselves time to grow into that new type of approach, I think is really important as well. Not trying to do everything all at once is really key. So, Sarah, thank you very much for what has been a really, really enjoyable conversation. I really appreciate the honesty, the transparency, and everything that you've shared on the call. If people want to find out a bit more about you and the work that you do, where should they go?
Yeah, and my absolute pleasure. Like I said at the start, I love talking about this stuff. So thanks for being here with me and giving me the space to dive in, and really appreciate all of your questions as well. Best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn, and I share a lot of content and thoughts, and I share pretty openly and transparently with my kind of broader community the things that I'm moving through as a leader and founder of a fast-growing startup. So if that's interesting for people as well, that's some of the content that I share. But yeah, and you can also check out growmoatly.com as well if you're interested in what we're doing there. And my book, Conscious Leadership, is available on Kindle and Amazon and Audible and all the places.
Excellent. And I've read the book. I think it's really enjoyable and well worth a read. So yeah, I definitely would recommend it to anybody in this position. So Sarah, thank you once again. Really appreciate your time coming on the podcast, having this conversation, sharing those insights, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. This is just a great podcast that you do for people as well. So thank you for doing this work in the world.
Let's go. Thanks for listening to Leading Remotely. For show notes, resources, or to discover how you can make remote work for your team, head over to wonder.me. That's wonder.me.